Shalom Uvracha from Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. We are privileged, with the help of God, to study together in our second Haftarah series. We are studying this evening the Haftarah, the prophetic reading of Parshat Noach. Those people who want to follow in the text, the references to chapter 54 and part of chapter 55 of the book of Isaiah. And indeed, these sections of Yeshayahu, these sections of Isaiah, are known to us from other Haftarot of the year. As we've mentioned in our previous studies, there are 7 consecutive readings from Isaiah from the 9th of Av, from Tisha B'Av, until Rosh Hashanah, which all deal with the consolation of Jerusalem, with the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael, with the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, with the ultimate rebuilding of the temple, with the ingathering of the exiles. The theme that's mentioned in what we call Shev D'Nehamata, the Sheva D'Nehemta, the 7 prophetic readings dealing with rebuilding Eretz Yisrael. Interestingly enough, the two sections of the Haftarah of Parshat Noach are also known to us from 2 other prophetic readings, 2 other Haftarot. If you study the Haftarah of Parshat Re'eh, if you study the Haftarah of Parshat Ki Teitzei, you'll see the Haftarah of Parshat Noach. We know these words, we know these readings, because we've encountered them in one of those 2 of the 7 readings between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah about the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael. So why are we reading it now? What does it have to do with Parshat Noach? Why do we read chapters 54 and 55 as the prophetic reading of Parshat Noach? Now, in most sources, if you'd ask this question, they would point out that in the reading of chapter 54 of Yeshayahu, Noach is mentioned. Noach is not mentioned many times in Tanakh, outside of Parshat Noach. But one of the places that he is mentioned twice is in chapter 54 of Isaiah, the reading of the Haftarah of this week, where God swears that the same way in the time of the flood, God swore that there never would be a flood of destruction, where the whole world would be destroyed again. So too God swears that certain types of affliction, certain types of destruction will never come upon the Jewish people. God compares one oath to the other, the oath of the indestructible Jew compared to the indestructible world that God presents after the flood. Never again will it ever be destroyed by the waters of a flood. And the reference, those people have the book of Yeshayahu open, it's chapter 54, verse 9, where we read that this is similar to the waters of Noach. Ki me Noach, so for this is similar to me, to the levels of the waters of the flood, the waters of Noach. Asher nishbati, that I swore, me avor me Noach od al haaretz, I swore I would never bring the waters of Noach again upon the face of the earth. So too I swear certain kinds of levels of commitment to the Jewish people. I think if most people would be asked, so why do we read Isaiah 54? Why do we read Isaiah 54 and 55 as the Haftarah of Noah? They'd say, well, it says Noach. How many times can you find? This is an interesting search question. How many times can you find the name of the parasha, or the name of the main character of the parasha, in the Haftarah? It's not common. The parasha is called Noach, and in the Haftarah we speak of Noach. That's the way most people would answer it. I would like to share an answer that I saw in the writings of Rabbi Hertz. I have the Hertz Chumash here in my hand, and sometimes I feel that the commentaries of yesteryear, commentaries of the past, sometimes we love and we respect and we revere all of the new writings and all of the new translations and all of the new great writers and the great insights of all of the people writing and translating and expounding and expanding the commentaries on the Chumash. And may they all be blessed. May they all be successful. But when I was growing up in many synagogues throughout the world, the Chumash which was most accepted was the Hertz Chumash. You remember such a thing?
Right.
What? The Hertz Chumash.
Birnbaum.
Right, that's right. That's another good example, right? The Birnbaum Siddur. I was brought up with the Birnbaum Siddur. Maybe I know one person today who uses the Birnbaum Siddur. Two people. Okay. No, it's a wonderful Siddur, but thank God, there are great breakthroughs. Art Scroll has done tremendous work in terms of teaching Torah to the world. May they be blessed eternally. Amen. But so sometimes I feel maybe it's good to go back to some of these previous works. And so I was studying this today. Rabbi Hertz's insights. Hertz, H-E-R-T. He was the chief rabbi of Great Britain. Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Hertz. And he writes something which is very beautiful. Maybe others said it before him. He said that one of the reasons for the selection of the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael, rebuilding of Yerushalayim in Parshat Noach, is that in a certain sense, there is a parallelism between the world that's rebuilt in the time of Noach and the ultimate world of Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, which is being rebuilt in the prophecies of the book of Isaiah. In other words, in both cases, there's a great destruction. In the case of the Jewish people, they're exiled. Jerusalem is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. But the world is the world of Eretz Yisrael, the world of Yerushalayim, will be rebuilt. That's the Haftarah. Rani Akara. Even though it seems so barren, even though it seems so empty, even though it seems so lively, they will once again be rebuilt. No, everything will turn back to a high level. So Noach sees three worlds. He sees a completely built world, and he sees a completely destroyed world, and then he sees a world that's once again rebuilt. And maybe the prophecies specifically of Yeshayahu teach that very message about the Jewish people and about the ultimate vision of Yerushalayim. But he also says that maybe both references to the flood and to the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael teach us a certain level of appreciation of the destruction that led to the rebuilding. He says the reference, and I'm reading from his commentary, the reference in verse 9 to the waters of Noach provides a literal connection with the Sidra, but the connection is deeper. The flood was apparently an act of destruction, yet by wiping out a corrupt world, it paved the way for a new humanity. In other words, if someone would only see the destruction of the flood, so what's the purpose of all this? Why should the world be destroyed? But one can read world history as such, that it's precisely as a result of the great flood that the world became perfected to greater levels. So Israel's exile from its suffering parallels that same concept. Israel's loyalty to God after the exile is ever so greater, because the exile led, the destruction of Yerushalayim led to this great longing for Israel, this great rebuilding of Israel, the ultimate level of the ingathering of the exiles, which is one of the themes of Isaiah 54 and Isaiah 55. In Isaiah chapter 12, not in our Haftarah, it says that the day will arrive when the Jewish people will thank God for expressions of wrath, for expressions of anger that God expressed towards the Jewish people. Va'amarta bayom hahu, odecha Hashem ki anafta bi. I want to thank you, God, the Jewish nation will proclaim, for expressing punishment to us, for expressing anger towards us. I want to thank you for the anger. I want to thank you for the punishments. But maybe if we realize that the exile, that the destruction, were just pathways to the ultimate construction, that maybe the only way to really build Eretz Yisrael, to really build Yerushalayim, was through the destruction of Yerushalayim, maybe we'll look back at the troubles and we'll see them as gateways of blessing. And a fascinating section of the Talmud, studied in Tractate Shabbat, page 13. There's a section there about a book called Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit, one of the first writings after the canon of the Bible. Very, very early work. Megillat Ta'anit. What is Megillat Ta'anit? It's a certain form of a calendar of dates, all of which have to be celebrated or observed at a certain level. Why? What happened on these days? The Jewish people went through certain great difficulties, and on each of these dates, listed in Megillat Ta'anit, the scroll of Ta'anit, they were relieved of these forms of suffering. Anyone who's ever studied Megillat Ta'anit, it's a very, very important subject. It's been printed many, many times, many editions of Megillat Ta'anit. It's surely worth studying. The Gemara asks, who wrote Shabbat 13b? Who wrote Megillat Ta'anit? So the rabbis say, well, Hananiah, I'm quoting Talmud, Shabbat 13b. Hananiah ben Chizkiah v'si'ato. Hananiah ben Chizkiah, one of the early great leaders, together with his associates, together with his group, they wrote this Megillat Ta'anit. They wanted this Megillat Ta'anit to be enforced. Shahayu mechabivim et hatzarot. Very unusual term. Shahayu mechabivim et hatzarot. For they loved the suffering. Rashi said, what do you mean they loved the suffering? They loved the fact that God so many times miraculously took them out of the suffering, and they wanted forever to perpetuate the memory of the great miracle of God, and therefore they established certain great dates in Megillat Ta'anit to always remember the redemption from those forms of suffering. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, one of the great rabbis of the period of the Mishnah, said, well, if we start writing down all the times that the Jewish people suffered, then maybe every day would be listed in Megillat Ta'anit. He says, he says we also appreciate the relief from troubles. We would never. Where does the list end? Is there any date in the calendar where the Jewish people didn't suffer in world history? So he has certain understanding of Megillat Ta'anit. But I wanted to discuss this term, Shahayu mechabivin et hatzarot. Shahayu mechabivin et hatzarot. That's the language that's used in the Gemara. They loved the suffering. They loved these difficulties. So Rashi learns, and I quote Rashi here, Rashi learns, this is the Rashi's commentary, mechabivin et hatzarot shenigalin mehem. They love the fact that they were redeemed from these forms of suffering. V'haneis chaviv alehem lahazkiro l'shvachol shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they want to mention the praise of God, and therefore they establish these great dates. However, the language of the Gemara does not sound like they loved the miracles. Asks the Maharshal of Shlomo Luria, asks the Maharsha, asks other commentaries. That's not the way we would write it. If it means that they love the redemption from the suffering. I'm reading the Maharsha. He quotes Rashi, and then he says, that's not the way it should be written. It should have said that they love the miracles. It should be Shayu mechabivim et hanisim. They love miracles. But they love troubles. So I've heard it suggested more than once. Rabbi Yoel Schwartz speaks about this often. One of the great rabbis here in Yerushalayim, and others. No, the ultimate level is that they understood in retrospect that even the difficulties, even the vicissitudes, even the challenges, were ultimately for their very good. In other words, mechabivin retroactively, not at the geula, not at the redemption from the suffering, but the tzarot themselves. They understood, for instance, in the case of Parshat Noach, the flood was a miracle in disguise. It doesn't look like it was a blessing in disguise. Not the rebuilding only after the flood. The flood led to the rebuilding. It was like a chance to begin everything all over again with a fresh start. The Rabbi Hertz's comment about the insight into the exile, the insight into the destruction of Yerushalayim, the insight into the destruction of the temple, the insight of the suffering of the Jewish people. In a certain sense, it wasn't only the rebuilding that was beloved to the Jewish nation, but even in retrospect, they will see that precisely through the suffering, that was the road to the redemption. As we read in Parshat Noach, about the rebuilding of the world. All the nations that stemmed from Noach, Noach's family after the flood, all the 70 nations that are listed in Parshat Noach. I guess each of us has to be part of that process of rebuilding the broken world, rebuilding the Jewish world. Thank God we're sitting here in Eretz Israel. We're in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh. We've already seen so much of the rebuilding of Eretz Israel. And we pray that the same way the world was rebuilt in our parasha, and Noach was able to see, he lived for hundreds of years, it says in the Torah, with hundreds of years after the flood, and saw the world again getting back on its feet. So too the Haftarah opens for us this new area of understanding that yes, the Jewish people went through so many difficulties, but they're coming back to Eretz Israel. They're coming back to Yerushalayim. There will be this great redemption. And I do hope that we'll all be able to experience it together as we study Parshat Noach this week. Thank you so much for listening. Shalom.